Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. I apologize for being late. Sometimes it's the weather, and you cannot do anything about it. So what we'll have today is actually, I think, very interesting talk, and you will see just in a bit. I'll let the speaker present themselves. But before I'll start, I'm interested to know how many in the audience is the first time that they're coming to the event of the Artian? Can you raise your hand if it's the first time? Okay, great. So let me tell you just briefly what is the Artian, so you will know who is the people that's standing over here and actually doing what we do. So my name is Nir, and I'm originally from Tel Aviv, Israel, and I'm the founder of the Artian. And the Artian, basically, it's innovation and creativity training company. But what we do is that we take practices and methods from the art world to teach skills that are required in the world of innovation and are not being tackled in the world of business. And 2 years ago, we found a very warm house here at Campus Madrid to actually expose and allow people to share this kind of a passion for the world of entrepreneurship, the world of business, the world of technology, and more importantly, the world of art. And what we are trying to do is actually to highlight why art is so important in all those disciplines. Why actually art and artists are key collaborators when we think about future, when we think about innovation, when we think about humanities. And personally, what I found is that every time when I spoke with my artist friends, all the time I felt that I'm behind. All the time there were 3, 4, 5, 6 steps ahead of me. And it's kind of intrigued my interest. How come? Why artists think in such a different way? And from what I saw is that all the time artists, as natural explorer in the world, people that actually have even doesn't have the liability to actually commit to an end result, but rather to wander the world and come up with questions, you actually discover many interesting things. And today, the concept of the event will discuss the intersection of science, technology with the world of art. And it's a great opportunity to say thank you to the Israeli embassy that actually help us to actually make this happen and bring those great speakers from Tel Aviv. And I want to start what we'll have. I will tell you briefly what we'll have. The first panel will be between Shimon and Eran, and they will talk in a minute about poetry, about creativity, about machine. And just after me and Liat will spoke about her work and what she's doing with the technology and how she refers technology. And at the end, we have cervezas, which is the most important part of the event. So don't leave, because it will be a fun to meet people that are interested in those topics. And with that, I want to kind of invite Eran and Shimon to kind of start the panel. And what we will do, meanwhile, I will pass between you books of Eran, and I guess he will talk about what exactly you're actually holding in your hands in just a second. Eran, Shimon.
Can you hear us? Yes.
Yeah. Good evening, Eran.
Hi, good evening, Shimon.
So we need to introduce ourselves. So I think each of us will say some words about it.
You go first.
I'll go first. Okay. My name is Shimon Adaf. I'm a writer from Israel, obviously, and I try to tackle in my work, and mostly in my fiction, I write poetry as well. I started as writing poetry, and I always go back to poetry. But mainly in recent years, I've been writing fiction. In my fiction, I try to tackle issues of the ways that technology and science influence the human experience, both the social experience, the concept of the self, the our worldviews and the way that we perceive reality.
Okay, my name is Eran Hadas. If you Google it in Spanish, at least in images, it's Eran Hadas, which means there were fairies or something, yes? The wonders of Google Spain. And I'm a poet, but I also have background in computer science, and I'm a software developer. And the thing about me is that I try to combine the two, and I refer to what I do as augmented poetry. I try to augment, to extend poetry to go beyond just writing and beyond just the page. And I do three main things that make this augmented. One is I build also, in addition to writing poetry, I write code that generates poetry or texts. The second thing is that I build chatbots. These are software pieces that talk back to you when you talk to them. And the third thing is that I also do interactive projects, but they must be based on the text.
So, Eran, you mentioned that you are both computer scientist, or you studied software engineering, and you are a poet. So did you start as a kind of traditional poet and move on to doing what you called augmented poetry? And I would choose another word for it, but not right now. Or did you start off as a computer science and discover the way that language works, and you wanted to deal with language with computer science?
It started out for me as two different, and I thought they were parallel paths, but somehow having done some work in both fields, I realized that it's going the same way. And I know it happens to a lot of creative people, a lot of artists, that some things they do out of intuition, but it sticks together. There's some kind of an invisible glue that suddenly brings everything to become one thing. And for me, in a sense, writing code is dealing with language and structure and aesthetics, which is not that different from writing poetry. Only the language is a language that executes another thing.
Yes, but what you do is trying to write code that tries to generate poetry, in a way, and not trying to mimic in your poetry the way that code works.
I suggest that we see
maybe
some
we'll see
projects.
some examples, and we can speak about them.
I'll go there. Or can you help me with that? You'll help me with that. But I'll just say that at first, when I got to the notion that perhaps I should do it using software, I thought of trying to build a general purpose poetry generator that will have all the texts inserted into it and come out with the best poem ever. But pretty quickly I realized it's not the direction to go. So for me, the code is a means, an instrument to get to a concept that I want to get through language, and it feels easier or better to access it through code rather than write it by myself.
Mind Your Poem. Computer-generated poems based on a person's state of mind. The user is provided with an EEG brainwave sensor headset, and the interactive poems are formed instantly to reflect their brain activity.
Cosmos stillness. The tree falls like a free girl, kind of quietly, like a gentle breeze. Why does the whale and...
The project mimics the creative process of a poet by mining the brain to illustrate emotional content. It manifests how technology can provide insight into our inner selves, the last human frontier. To a meditative state, the algorithm will respond with sentences about nature. A concentrated state of mind will generate content related to urban life. An aroused state of mind will generate content related to physicality and body positions. And for an idle state of mind, the content would be mostly gibberish, prompting the user to feel something strongly for the headset to read. The user is witness to the sentences as they form into a poem and has the ability to change them by changing their thoughts and concentration. Mind your...
Let's see another one.
Let's see another.
Number 2, please.
Most people believe that a computer can generate a portrait, but it cannot tell how good this portrait is. The Electronic Curator is a project that deals with curatorship and with decision-making.
This work uses a generative adversarial network, or specifically a variant of the scikit-gun, in order to convert faces into vegetable portraits.
One network represents a painter, and the other one represents a curator, and the two networks negotiate, each improving by the feedback it gets from the other.
Our exhibition is about interactive art. We exhibit artists who use technology as their media.
What's special about this generative artwork is that we're using not only a neural network to do the generation of the portrait, but also replacing the human curator and writing a curator text on the result of the artwork.
And by giving a grade, a final grade to the work it has done.
Basically, the exhibit is about art that does not exist without the viewer's participation. The machine uses the viewer as its model, but basically creates and curates the art all by itself.
So let's talk about the first clip that we saw about the Mind Your Poem. Why is it so important to write poetry for you? You know, why do you go through all this kind of inventing this machinery that reads or try to read the emotions and then put them into text? You could still stop at just reading people's emotion. Why do you have to put them into text and turn them into poetry?
First of all, that's a good question. I think that this project tried to serve as a mirror for us and for our relationship with machines, because the last thing you would expect from a computer is to write poetry based on your inner thoughts. And while it is apparent that today we cannot do that, still we're at the beginning of a process that will eventually allow to get closer to doing that. And the way this project works is by reading the brainwaves of people, which is something that is very, it's part of our inner self, you know, it reads your mind, not in the sense that we expect it to do it eventually, but it does read your mind and it writes a poem. So what does this say about us, about our existence, about our mind, if it can be expressed in terms of numbers and digits and statistics?
Yeah, but is it expressed by the numbers and statistics, or you have to translate it back into poetry in order to understand what this number says? And once you translate it, then the numbers don't really matter.
But they do matter. That's the thing. Of course, it doesn't work like this, but it does, because the numbers do have their place. And the more we can understand how our brain works, we're getting closer to a situation where we can explain by scientific terms things that we see as spiritual.
Why is it important to you?
It is important because it deals with the advancement of technology and the way it affects humanity. We can just go forward with technology and be cyber enthusiastic and turn into machines automatically. No machine has opened a world war or any war yet.
Yet, yeah.
You
That's,
know,
that's
so
the key word.
perhaps machines are better than us, or we are worse than them. But I do think that we all feel that it's up to us to determine where technology takes us, or whether we take technology or technology takes us further. And this is sort of what I sometimes call cyber skepticism, that it's not about turning off the light. We don't need to ignore technology completely, but on the other hand, we cannot walk blindly after it.
And you think that if we, in order not to be blind to technology, we have to decipher the way the human psyche work and the way the our emotion work. So how, and you try to do it by trying to decipher the way the creativity works. So what your, you know, when you talk with poets about creativity, and they start to talk about inspiration, start to talk in mystical terms, and you try to mechanize, in a way, creativity. You try to break it into procedures and try to copy it. So do you think that creativity is just something biological? Is it something that someone can learn, machine can learn to be creative?
So the second project is about that, because basically we can think of creativity in terms of two different processes. The first of which is generating what we do, but the second of which is the assessment, trying to figure out whether what we did is good or not. And I think that most people believe today, I think that's what I said in the video, most people believe that we can do the first, computers can generate anything. If you give them enough data and you run something randomly or procedurally, they'll do it. But they can generate any text, but will this text be good enough?
But good enough for whom?
Yeah.
For humans?
How do you decide as a poet or a writer what text is good for you?
For me, it's my experience, my inner experience. When I read the good text, then it changes something in me. And that's what I hope to do when I write my literature. I try to convey my, inner experience. Now, when you go in the world and you experience certain things, then the first thing that you do, you turn it into knowledge. If you are burned by the fire, then you turn it into the knowledge to fear fire. But poetry, for me, literature in general, it's kind of the opposite way. It's turned knowledge into experience. You have inner knowledge about the world, about yourself, and you turn it into experience by means of language. And for me, this is the main thing about mythic literature. And we have this kind of fantasy about randomness in creativity. The story about if you give monkeys enough time and throwing cubes, or give them just typing on typing machine, they will produce a poem or a sonnet by Shakespeare or a play by Shakespeare. Because if you have enough permutations, one of them would be a poem or a work by Shakespeare. And I don't think that's the way it works.
That's one way it can work, and there's a different way. But I think you have a poem that deals exactly with that. So why don't we hear it?
It's not exactly with that. It's a poem that really, in a way, surprised me, because it's a poem that it's kind of far away from what we're talking about right now. But the process of writing the poem kind of taught me how I work with poetry. And I didn't intend to write this poem, and you would see that it's kind of for me, it's a very strange poem. This is the poem in Spanish. It was translated by Ana Maria Bejerano, and this is the Hebrew version. על מה שירה שאני בקושי צועדת, גם אם מקל לא מצליחה מהר מספיק. הדלתות כבר מתקפלות והריאות נוקסות חזק, עוד חתיכת אוויר, אומרות כסלב. רק אצבע של גבר יכולה לסרטט את השמש עין טרוטה. העננים מתאספות סביבה, כמו כעס לפני מכה שבאה על מורידה, מורעבות ומזילות, גשמים חשוכות. אני כבר מגיעה, מרביצה על הזכוכית, תפתח, תפתח, יא חתיכה טיפשה, ובלי רצון פותחת הכלבה כמו בעל שבולעת אוכל באיבה. תודה, תודה. הרוק הופך להקאה, בחוץ סופה, רק יד של גבר יכולה לבנות מדרגות כמו עמוד תלייה. על מה שירה? הלוואי הייתי בחיים יותר, יודעת לקלל מכאן ועד להודעה חדשה. הצירים תפסו את כל הכיסאות, חראים קטנות, נותנות לי לעמוד, תפו זונות. And maybe, what?
¿Para qué la poesía si apenas puedo andar de lo cansada que estoy? Si ni con el bastón consigo darme la suficiente prisa. Las puertas ya se cierran y los pulmones muerden con fuerza otro pedazo de aire. Dicen Kislev. Solo el dedo de un hombre es capaz de esbozar el sol como un ojo lloroso. Las nubes se juntan a su alrededor como el enfado antes del golpe que el marido descarga, hambrientas y destilando lluvias sombrías. Ya casi llego, golpeo abatida el cristal, abra, pedazo de estúpida, y con desgana abre la perra como el marido que engulle la comida con rencor. Gracias, gracias. La saliva se convierte en vómito, fuera la tempestad. Solo la mano de un hombre puede construir unas escaleras con forma de palo de ahorcado. ¿Para qué la poesía? Ojalá hubiera estado más inmersa en la vida y supiera maldecir. Hasta ahora nueva orden. Los jóvenes han ocupado todos los asientos. Esos pequeños mierdas me dejan aquí de pie. Malditos cabrones.
So thank you. It's a very far away poem from, it's very distant from what we're talking about, but for me it's a poem about the creative process, because it's based on actual experience. I was working on this, my second book of poetry, and I had, and for me it was writing about language and how language works and trying to figure out how my Hebrew works and what's the roots of my Hebrew, what's the sounds of my Hebrew. And while I was working, I was taking the bus, and there was an old woman trying to get to the bus, and the bus driver just he saw her. I saw him seeing her, and he just kept going, and then he stopped because some people in the bus cried out. And she was just hitting she was very, very angry, and she was hitting the doors, and then she was cursing everyone when she went up. And when she passed by me, I felt like part of her rage is kind of flowing out of her and just entering me in a way that it was occupying me, and I was possessed by her rage. And I was pondering this rage, and I was thinking about how do I put it in words, because as I was saying, poetry is about taking the knowledge and turn it into experience. How do I turn it back into experience, real experience for me, for others? And I couldn't find out a key till I understand that I don't think that it's you can hear it in the Spanish, but in Hebrew, there is a problem of gender in the poem, because the woman, she's taking all the male verbs and nouns in Hebrew and turning them into female nouns, and she just speaks in female language. And I understand that her rage was about, it wasn't just about the bus, it's about the way that that men in her life are kind of bringing her down or oppressing her. And understanding that the only way to convey it is trying to be violent toward language. The way that she was violent toward everybody else, it would be the only way to pass it on, to give it to someone else and do violence for them and to them. And all this kind of, all this process, for me, when I hear you or I see your work, is kind of redundant, because it doesn't matter. You could tell me that that this word could be randomly generated by computer, and it would be the same experience for me. That's what you're saying.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I think that in a sense, and I have some experience with that. If you give people texts and you don't tell them, because usually they don't suspect that you don't tell them whether it's human or computer that are responsible for this text, that they will be wrong about it. As a matter of fact, I had this poetry generator project at the Science Museum in Jerusalem, and they asked me to measure, it was a test. They knew that some texts were generated by computers and others did not, and they asked me to measure, people had this button to choose whether it was written by a human or a computer, and they asked me to measure the accuracy of the results, and apparently 80% of the people were wrong. Now, if
it's
it was
kind of a Turing test about poetry.
It was exactly a poetry Turing test, and if it was 20% wrong, I would say, okay, it wasn't good enough for the computer to generate. If it was 50%, it meant they guessed. It was perfect. But 80% means that the question is wrong. People just came biased about computer, so they thought, okay, computers can't do that, so automatically they were wrong. So I think it depends a lot about us. Now, what you're saying can be looked from a spiritual way of this information moving spiritually from that woman missing the bus to you, but you can also look at it in terms of information. And there is a famous phrase coined by the American literary critic Marjorie Perloff, who said that there are, do you know? Moving information. Now, moving information means information that moves from one place to the other, but it can also mean emotionally moving information. And that's what you're saying. It's not just information anymore. It's information that creates an emotion. Now,
but emotion isn't in itself information as well. It's kind of you could say it kind of cognitive data or.
Okay, but
sense data.
yes. But the way that you determine whether a poem is good or bad for you is by that emotion. So perhaps you're an electronic curator yourself. Now,
So you're saying I'm a robot, an android.
I think that the more we learn about the way the human body works, the more we kind of reveal that there's a more robotic part in us that we'd like to believe.
So do you think that poetry or art should show us the way that we are, in a way, kind of automated, or should it free us from the way that we are kind of getting used to being automated by the world?
That's a good question, but I think it can also be asked about poetry, and especially about lyric poetry, because you know, the more texts we have that are lyric poetry, the more they resemble each other, and sometimes you need this unoriginality to become original. Now, I think that there are a lot of ways in which the use of computer-generated art or computational creativity in general can make us think in new ways about creativity. For instance, it's an aesthetic measure that we can define that the more beautiful or humane we want to be, the more we try to do things that will be hard for a computer to understand or reproduce. So in a sense, you can redefine humanity if you want by moving away from being robotic in your words.
So give me an example from your work. How do you do it? By writing an algorithm that writes poetry? And in what way it differs from just writing poetry?
So as I said, I don't try to build a know-all algorithm that will create the most perfect poems, but I do use normal, techniques that are rule-based or statistics-based. I think it's a good time, speaking of robots and bots, to show a robot that I built with other people. Yeah. And the main question is here, try to test how human people are.
I am a robot, and I am trying to figure out what it means to be human. Can you tell me about yourself?
I'm confused about speaking to a robot.
To turn you off, I would like to turn you on, as a matter of fact.
You're a really slow robot. You're like an intellectually challenged robot.
Okay, see, Frankie, this is your first lesson at being human. If you repeat the same question, you make people angry.
I know, you asked me already 3 times. Stop it, Frankie.
I see in you an opportunity to see something in me.
I kind of pity you.
Yeah, when I think about me looking at you, all I ever want to think about is you and how I'm reflected in you.
Don't you wish you could move? Or respond or do anything?
Understand? Are you nodding or did I shake the table?
If I could love, I would love you too.
Really? That's very nice. You could love. I guess you could in the future.
So there are two, I would say, like two sides to writing poetry or doing art in a computational way. The first one is trying to understand in what processes in us we can duplicate and expose the way they are kind of automatic processes. And the other way is trying by doing this kind of art to free ourselves from being automated. And this question has not just artistic value, but also it also has moral sides and moral aspects. Because we live in a world in which we are the main interest of technology right now in deciphering the human psyche and its working is that it can replace humans and even get hold of the humanity and reduce it into kind of robotic state. And do you think that in doing so, in like making project that trying to understand how what does it mean to be human, you are collaborating with this kind of effort?
I'm not trying to collaborate with anyone's effort, first of all.
No, you're collaborating a lot. You're doing interactive.
I do think it shouldn't be humans against computers. It shouldn't be computers determining everything for humans. But I do think that we experienced this early stage of the internet where everything was free and equal for everyone, and slowly we are stepping, or even we are deep in a situation where you have only one product that does something. We're here in Google, and there's only one search engine. Well, there's some competition,
Bing.
but
no, Bing and Alta Vista still exists.
Everyone who's on Facebook, although we hear everything that happens with them, the bad things, and still there's only one Facebook, and there's only one Twitter, and there's only one Wikipedia, although in Madrid they tried to create another one. If you remember, about 15 years ago, they were some people in Madrid were afraid that they're going to have commercials, so they kind of forked or created a copy of Wikipedia, and it didn't survive. So we see that in the commercial field, the strong enterprises are kind of gaining or have gained most of the power, and the independent data is getting weaker. And if I'm trying to collaborate with a certain attitude regarding morality, is trying to bring technology back and use things like small data rather than big data, and try to get robots to fail. You know, in all of the demos we saw, there are evident failures of the machine. But they're all projects that try to show the independent side of computation. It's computation that doesn't try to get into money making or to weapon building. It just does things that are useless and only make you think, hopefully.
Or we should just make moral robots that would fight the immoral robots.
I think it happens. Yeah. I think that Israel as a state tries to do that, and Iron Dome is like a mechanism that is built in order to prevent war by intercepting rockets, but it's not enough. You cannot build a machine to replace the morality of of the people or the soldiers or the government. It's good to have machines, but the responsibility to use them properly still lies on us.
Many science fiction writers would disagree with you, like Asimov, but let's stop at this point and maybe we'll have some Q&As if you have questions about what we were talking about or clarifications.
Before we move into the question, Eran, can you say something about the books that are passing in the meanwhile? We always like to make it interactive, otherwise it doesn't worth it. I mean, so raise your hand meanwhile if you have questions so I can come to you with a microphone while Eran speaks about this project.
If you read it from left to right, there's the code there. So did anyone manage to figure out what's going on with the code? But anyway, I took the Torah, the 5 first books of Moses that are part of the Bible, which is the behavioral codex of both Judaism and Christianity to an extent, and I extracted only the haiku poems in them, only the text that generates a 5-syllable, 7-syllable, 5-syllable structure, and then it creates an alternative reading of the Bible in a different, a universal way, because the structure haiku, if you're into poetry, is a Japanese one. So this is a way of generating text, not by using an algorithm that tries to employ machine learning or artificial intelligence, but rather just a tool to show a text differently, to have a different context to it.
Okay, questions. We always need the first one. And if you reading about artificial intelligence and everyone tell you that you should be worried about robots, and there is one barrier that stops robots from taking your job, which is creativity, you have over here great people to ask what they think about it. So, great. 1 second.
Good evening. So my question is, the poetry thing, it's about the poet expressing and trying to communicate their feelings through words. So I was wondering that if this kind of technology you're speaking about arrives at some point in which everybody can use it, wouldn't that be dangerous for the traditional way of making poetry, since we will have already the technology, so the traditional way of writing poetry will disappear?
That's a great question. I'll repeat it the way I understood it. Does the new technological methods, if they become available to everyone, do they pose a danger to traditional poetry, because everyone can do it? So what's the point of doing the same thing if there is an instrument available for that? And as a matter of fact, there was an Israeli poet that didn't believe that the poems I generate are real because they resembled his. So he came to my apartment and he asked me to press the run button and generate poems. And then he said, listen, you cannot make this open source. It cannot be available. So I did it because I did for that specific project because I didn't want to embarrass him. But as a matter of fact, the same question occurs with Photoshop, where everyone can take a picture, generate a picture, replace painting. You can go even back to the invention of photography. Did it replace painting? In a sense, it did. But more than that, I think it evolved. It it made painting evolve, and there are less realistic paintings, although they do exist, but not in the same level as photography, but other things, other types of painting came into play. And I think the same thing should happen to literature or poetry. I remember that Google released an automatic completion tool the same way they do to our search queries. They did for stories, where you write like 3 words and then it tries to predict the 4th word, and if you accept it, it will predict the 5th word, and so forth. And they took it down. I don't know why. Probably they have their reasons. I think they were afraid of someone stealing their entire data by using this technique. But yes, I'm sure that writing is going to change because of the technological features.
More questions?
Hi, I would like to know which kind of waves are you registering and with which technology you're doing this for the first project?
It was like 6 years ago, so I'm not sure I remember, but I used one of the, there are 2 popular sets of EEG headsets. One of them is emotive, I think, or something like that, and I used this one or the other. You can Google it and see, and basically it gives some measures out of the box, which means that if you can write code, you can read those measures from the product itself. And the 2 things that come out of the box are the level of concentration. The more concentrated you are, it'll give a higher result. And the other one is called meditation. Is the level? It's a level of calmness. The more calm you are, the higher the score will be. And it was funny because a lot of people who practice yoga, especially women, can kind of make it go from 0 to 100 like this. You know, if you can do yoga, you can control things using your brain, which is amazing. We also built our own, it's called Arousal Measures, that there are papers that are dealing with ways that use the theta, alpha, beta, all those things that I don't remember by heart, but we just copied the formula and we put it, and we tested what works for us and what didn't. So we had those measurements.
Yeah, I have a question. Hi. So you were saying that you measured the wavelength of the brain, and some of them had to do with readings about concentration. So how does that affect the quality of poems produced? Because I think part of art is the unconscious part of it, right? The unconcentrated, the feelings, the emotions. So how does that play in?
Yeah, totally. So in a sense, this project is anti-poetry. You know, it works as sort of a broken mirror of showing how poetry works and what isn't mechanical and what is.
Shimon, you want to comment on that?
No, I just my worldview, or my belief is that being human is all about transcendence, in a way that you see what there is in the world and you want to become better than it. You want to overcome it. In a way, the more obstacle you put in front of people, then they will become better. And I think that is a moral side of trying to do art with technology, because technology just shows you where are you being reductive about yourself. when you are confined or when you are closed by your habits, by your ways of thinking, but by your patterns. And once you see it, then you want to be better than it.
I think that I totally agree with you on the one hand, but on the other hand, I think that in history, we live in the first time where there's another intelligent being that is not human, and this is artificial intelligence. And the intelligence comes into play in decision making. Well, for the first time, an intelligent decision can be made by something that isn't human. And an intelligent decision making can be showing you what the algorithm thinks is your favorite song on Spotify or video on YouTube and so forth. And this kind of forces us to think what is the mechanism for our decision making, and this can lead to a better morality.
Okay. Thank you, Shimon. Thank you, Eran, for sharing all those interesting insights about artificial intelligence, machine, humans, and creativity. And what I want to do now is actually invite our next speaker, and Liat. Yeah, the story with Liat is that I heard about her so much from so many different people you cannot imagine, from 3 different continents, that everyone told me, Nir, you have to meet this girl. And finally we make it, like, I don't know, in my last visit to Israel it was? Yeah, wow, it was so quick. Yeah, you're going to hear now what Liat will talk about her work, but I will encourage you also to keep your questions, because later on we have some drinks and beers, as I told you, which can be very interesting for you also to speak with the speaker just after. And Liat has an interesting story. She's a computer science graduate and biology graduate. And before she started to do art, she actually worked as a researcher in Microsoft Innovation Lab in Israel. And Liat, it's interesting to understand, what are you doing in the art?
Well, I was also always doing art, but I never gave it the place until I found my material to actually do art, make art. I always also had the other side that you mentioned. In my background, I come from science, I come from technology, but I think that the first time I actually gave a real place for my art was when I found my material to do art. And my material is technology. So about 9 years ago, I started playing with electronics, and that's what opened everything for me. I started doing small projects, and they got bigger and bigger, and I started showing them, and at some point I realized that that's what I was doing.
Which made me kind of interested what your bosses thought about the fact that you are doing art in Microsoft.
The funny thing is that I started doing electronics because of Microsoft in a way. We had, in my group, we had a very open culture, let's say, and every few months we had a week where we left our day job, let's say, and we did any project we wanted. And every project I chose to do involved electronics. And that's eventually what drove me out of Microsoft.
Okay, sounds interesting. I guess probably the managers now asking themselves if they should give some time to do what you want. And you know, you started to refer to materials. And normally when we think about art and we think about materials, we think about maybe about painting, about the basic aspects of how to make art. But you actually chose technology as material. You chose data as material. I mean, why you refer technology as material, and why you actually mix it with the basic materials of life, like water, like stones?
So I think that all of these materials are not essentially different from each other, and they're also not essentially different from paint, definitely not from photography. It's all about dealing with human content with the tools you have as an artist. So for me, I many times make works with materials that involve both, I call it hot and cold materials. Sometimes they are distant and maybe even alienated, but I try to bring them back into humanity. And maybe I'll show you some works and then we can continue talking about that.
That will be perfect, I think.
Cool. So what you see here, we need to have a little sound.
Yeah. 1 second.
So this is actually an exhibition that just closed 2 weeks ago in France. It's my recent work. And it was a solo exhibition in Rochelle on the west coast of France. And basically I had 2 large installations there. The one you see here is composed of 800 glasses of water. They're half filled with water, and they have small magnets inside. And they're all set up in a really big table, upside down. So the water is locked between the glass and the surface, and it's moving because below the surface there are large magnets that move. And I can control these large magnets, and I can create an image with this moving water. So I use data of ships at sea, at the Atlantics, and I took all the ships, the vessels that went through Rochelle, the specific place where the exhibition took place, since last January. So in this case, in this sense, it was a location-based work, data location-based work, and this large table visualized the motions of ships in this area of the sea. If we move to the next video. So this is the second work that was at the same exhibition. It was in a different location, and it had a painting machine that painted with a paintbrush and ink on paper, and it created a calligraphic motion, and it also visualized the same data, the data of motions of ships at sea. But in this case, instead of using the territory, let's say, or the physical structure, here I use the data as history. I try to select which ships get into my history archive. And through this installation, through the exhibition, more and more paintings were created and added to the archive. It was a lot for me about control of physicality using all these classes, but also controlling the data. Let's move to another one.
1 second, before we move to another one, I think what's important to say, and maybe you can elaborate on that, is that actually you built your own machines and you actually code them to do it. It's not off-the-shelf machine that's created. Can you elaborate why you choose actually to create your own tools and actually create also the language to do it?
Let me answer with a question. Would you ask a painter this question?
No, but I guess that it's much more easy to get a canvas than to build a machine.
I don't know, there are very difficult techniques in painting, in sculpture, in installation. I think it's another technique. It's my language. That's the language I control and I speak. And that's the language where I can say my pains or my wishes with. So, and basically it starts with the fact that I really love doing this kind of works,
We'll go later to the Arduino and machines part.
Okay.
So you wanted to speak about this one we just showed the video?
You can see some of the images here, and let's move to the next work. So what you see here is actually my first solo exhibition that took place about 4 years ago in Jerusalem, and it had 4 installations. And the exhibition was called People You May Know, like the Facebook suggestion to meet new friends. And it was, for me, it was all about intimacy and the ability to be heard and to speak in today's social media world. And also to give attention. We get so much information over social media, but when we speak on social media, we're very sensitive to the amount of attention we get. But when we just get the overexposure of all this information, we give it very little attention. And here I had on the installation you see now, this is a sound installation. It was composed of 76 speakers hanged from the ceiling in these aluminum balls. And these balls directed the sound downwards. And the sound moved from one speaker to another, and it basically created a sound animation in the space. So the sound that you heard was text from Facebook that I chose offline. And I chose them as text that had personality inside. And I created a unified identity or unified personality from many texts like that. And I recorded myself reading them, and they moved in the space, and basically you had to follow the sound in order to really hear the text. And the installation next to it worked with the sound installation. They were synchronized. And this installation gave back the physical dimension to the sound, because here there were two axes from the two walls, and each axis had these tubes that inflated. And when one tube inflated, it pointed to a direction, and when two inflated, they pointed to a point, basically, which was this location of the sound in the next room. These two works were one next to the other. And the material that I used here is thermal blankets that are used to maintain body heat, but they're visually, they look like a very cold material, but their goal is the opposite of that. And also in these two works, I used the air as a material. The sound moves on the air, and here the air gives a physical dimension to the identity. Let's move to the next one. The third installation in this work gave back some of the original identity of the people I took the text from, and it's a painting machine that paints with with paintbrush and water on the plaster surface, and it writes the names of the people that I took their texts. And the water writes the names in the calligraphic way and creates a feed that also disappears because the water evaporates. And it's an endless feed of names that are written and disappears. But the material that I used below is a plaster, like the very simple construction material. And it's made of plaster, but also of paper. And along the months and a half of the exhibition, this paper got scratched, and it got scars of the names that were written again and again and again. Let's move to the next one. And this installation, it's the last installation of this exhibition, and it's the first time I showed an installation with no electronics at all. It's also made of mylar. It's a wrapping material of wet wipes for men. Apparently there is a product like that. And of course it's branded in dark blue, because that's how you would brand wet wipes for men. And this material, I got it from a factory. I got like 3 kilometers of this material. And me and my team created 1,000 of these tubes. The tubes are about 70 centimeter height, 20 centimeters diameter. And they're rolled in two ways. One is that the silver side is outside, and one is that the printed dark blue side is outside. And this gives me a material that is basically 2 kinds of pixels. And with these pixels, I created a 1,000 pixel image that is spread along a surface of 20 meter over 10 meter. And this building had a patio with a balcony, and it was hanged from the balcony. So you could be below it if you were on the first floor, or on the same level if you were standing on the balcony, or above it if you went to the upper floor. And if you went above it, you actually saw an image. And the image was the general icon, the feminine icon of Facebook before you put your own profile picture. It's the placeholder, the most generic one. And if we move to the next one, So this is the original plan of the work. It was a very, very obsessive production work of creating all these tubes and arranging them. It's a lot of work. Let's move to the next one. That's the way it looked from a drone. And that's actually, with a drone, it's the only place you can actually see the real image, the complete image. But that's a place a human can never get to. And all this work ended up in 5 minutes. Can you turn this? Also part of the process and the work itself. Temporary nature of the work is very strong for me, and in many works as well. And the obsessiveness, the need to control, this is the moment where I let go, and that's it. I took some of them for me, and the rest went for recycling, basically. Let's move on to the next one. So the sound installation was later recreated and was displayed at the Israel Museum and later on in Bonn Bundes Museum. If we move to next. And this work also shows a temporary imagery. And basically it's the attending machine. I created a machine that shows images that appear and disappear. And I use a material here that is sensitive to UV light. And when you expose it to UV, it changes the color to blue for about 30 or 40 seconds. And then it fades back to its native state. So I created a Facebook event and I called people to donate their virtual identity to art. And whoever said they're attending the event got inside the machine. So these are the profile images of about 250 people that run inside the machine forever.
Interesting. Suddenly you open so many questions that I didn't have before. But you know, you referred till now. You referred to the side of technology and data as more of a material. But there is another aspect in your work that kind of interests me, is that you put technology in a humanistic context. I mean, you want to refer to technology in a way of that relates to memory, that relates to intimacy. But normally we think about technology as something very cold. And how, first of all, how you do it, and why you're actually interested to give maybe a humanistic connection between us and the technology through the artworks.
Because I think that's what's the important thing, you know. It's eventually it's about humans and it's about humanity. And if I go to a less pomposic speech, it's about me. It's about what I'm worried about. It's about my pains. It's about what I'm interested in. So, you know. And as I said, I use technology because that's the material that inspires me. But I think that a work, I would consider a work interesting if it has the side of, like when you see it, you get something that is intuitive and emotional before you start analyzing it, before you start seeing the, you know, it's beyond the technology. So, I don't know, maybe we see the next few works, and I think they're concentrated more in the humanity than even the ones before. So this is an early work of mine. It's one of the first I showed, and it was the opening event of Fresh Paint Art Fair in Tel Aviv. And it was done in a collaboration with Asaf Talmudi, who is a musician, and Shlomi Shaban was also a musician, an Israeli one. And basically I built a machine, a painting machine, that is quite large. It's about 4/3 meters, hang 2 meters above ground. And it's painting with 4 acrylic paints on a large canvas that's 2 meters below it. And it's reactive to live music. And I called this work Heart for the Tin Man because it was just about that. And I think that when I just started to work with this kind of materials, it was a lot in my system. Maybe today I moved on to different subjects because I realized that it's just another material, and the real subjects are the subjects, that are in my life. So maybe we see the video of this work. Let's move to the how the musicians are playing, and with their music, they're activating the machine. So the parameters of the sound are mapped into parameters of the machine directly. And the musicians learned this new tool of painting. So when they're playing, they're actually watching the canvas and watching the machine because they want to get a visual effect and not only the auditory effect. So we had 4 performances, and each one was different, and each one created a different result as well.
It's interesting because you kind of from one side you can say you force them to look at the music from a different angle, but from another aspect you can actually say you open a new routes to look at them. And I'm interested, what were their response? What were their feedback? How they perceive their music after seeing their music and not hearing their music?
So I think it was we had a lot of fun, basically. So I speak for me, but it was a very fun project because it was very experimental, definitely for me because it was the very beginning of my work, but also for them because it's not their usual tools. So it created a challenge for them because it's another set of rules that create a new structure in their playing. It gives constraints for the way they play. So I think, eventually they created images that look something mechanical, but also human. And I don't know if they had a specific goal in mind when they did it, but it was a very playful process for all of us. It's also relatively new. It's from last year, and it was done in a collaboration with a good friend of mine, who is a ceramics artist, Roy Mayan. Can you play the video? So I created a machine that is something between a throwing wheel and a record player. We called it the plate recorder because what we actually did was recording sounds in real time, live, on plates, on ceramic plates. It was performed and displayed in a ceramics biennial, which is a very conservative domain in ceramics. So it was destructive in this sense. And what happens here is that Roy is working on the throwing wheel, is taking ready-made ceramic plates and adding overglaze on the plates, and then he passes the plates to me. I put it on the machine, and we record the sounds around us. So let's hear some of these sounds. So we just told him about the work. We just chatted with him on the street, and we invited him to play with us. So he came, and people got really engaged with him. It was
very Bravo.
These are examples of records.
So you know, one of the person that actually recommended me to meet Liat is Dr. Uli from Axel Springer. Axel Springer is one, I think, of the, if not the biggest media group in Germany, and today they're actually expanding around the world. And Uli is like a very is a scientist I think by every definition that you can say, but he's a very big believer in art. And he's the founder of Axel Springer Accelerator, basically a space for startups to grow companies in the media industry. And as a big believer of art, from day one, of the accelerator, they actually open Artist in Residence program. Just to give you a reference for one that are not familiar with the concept, Artist in Residence program mainly taken from the world of science and art, where an institution invite an artist to take time out of their routine to actually create their own art. And what Axel Springer did in this accelerator actually is the same. They bring artists to sit next to their entrepreneurs, and hopefully from those intersections in conversation, of just sharing space together, when creative minds come together, better things can come up. And actually Liat was one of the artists that participated in the program, and he recommended me to meet Liat, and you know, it's very interesting for me to kind of hear your experience. What does it mean for an artist to be in this environment?
So you know, it's funny because I know this world. I come from this world. So it was a mixed experience for me. When there was the opportunity to do this residence, I was very happy because I didn't think about it so much, but I realized that I really missed this part as well, you know, being around the startups and the developers. And so I was thrilled about going and doing my work there. And when I was there, like the accelerator gives, every time they take 10 startups and 1 artist for 3 months. And people do their work, and we get a lot of support from the accelerator. And basically, I was working on an exhibition, so I had the specific goal, and it was a very high tension process in a way, because I had also a deadline, just like the startups. So we were working in a startup atmosphere, let's say. And it created many interactions. So I don't know if it's because of me being an artist that deals with technology or not. I believe that it's not related to that. But many people came to me, you know, it wasn't a general thing. Sometimes some people came, sometimes other people. And we shared ideas, and many ideas got into my process, and we talked about their work, and I hope some influence went the other way as well. So it was fun. I'm very happy to be back in my studio as well, because it's you know, it's also a specific choice that I made too. But I think that these collaborations are very, I wouldn't say helpful, but they're very, they give air to both sides, and they're inspiring for both sides.
So I have a question. What is the similarities that you saw between entrepreneurs and artists?
They're dreamers, they're creative. They have fantasies. Many times they're very driven, and they're people, you know. They have their pains, they have their loves, they have everything that is in common.
Maybe we'll see the work that you actually did while you were in Axel Springer, and you can elaborate on your work, and then I'll be happy if you can share with us this experience that you had with one of the entrepreneurs that you reminded me, that you told me.
So I was working there on a painting machine that mapped text into visuals and basically created a visual encryption of the text by converting the sequence of letters into a sequence of machine motion and paintbrush motion. So this painting machine, in a similar way to the one I showed you before, was working with ink on paper. And you can see the images on the walls around the machine that have different types of visuals. So the most simple encryption that I created is a linear one, which took every letter and mapped it into a length of a line or also a length of a space. So you have information both in the line but also in the spaces. And there were more complicated encryptions. And the text it took was also a computer generated. I created a fake news generator. And it's with similar ideas to the ones Eran was also talking about. And basically, each time it created a new fake article and encrypted it visually to images that are very appealing and don't disclose a lot about the original content.
And I remember that you told me that one of the entrepreneurs that actually worked over there came with his own idea to how you can create your own art.
Yeah, so as we got closer and closer to the deadline, we all worked nights. And we had our late takeaway dinner at midnight many times. And one of the guys there was talking to me about what I was doing, and I don't know, it was really late at night. And the next morning when we met again, he came to me and he said that he actually created a simulation of one mapping that maybe I can use, and eventually I did use it. It's the one with the circles over there that you can see, well, over there, I see it on the monitor. So this is an example of a very concrete influence of the work.
Yeah, I was trying to look in for the laser pointer, but yeah, I think maybe.
We lost the image.
1 second.
Yes.
Yeah, you need to also the Mac way. So this is the visuals, and do we have a video over here?
I think so. Let's see. These are some of the.
No.
No,
So,
you didn't put the video.
You know, there is another thing that you talked, and this is one of the things that I'm interested in my work that I do with the Artian. You know, entrepreneur entering to a accelerator, and of course they get growth hacking and marketing and financials and etc. But actually, with you, there was also exchange of different knowledge. And I remember that one of the things that you mentioned is that you giving Arduino workshop for the entrepreneurs, and maybe you can say one word about what is Arduino. And on the same time, you as an artist were required actually to participate in their demo day and actually pitch your ideas into the audience. How was the experience from both sides? From one, giving knowledge and getting knowledge.
So, okay, I'll start with the second one. So, since for me it wasn't a completely strange situation, I felt very easy being a part of that. And the startups had many workshops. Some of them were pitch workshops, which were super helpful, both for me and for the startups, of course. And many were more technical and professional workshops. Some were interesting for me, some were not. But at some point, I suggested that I give an Arduino workshop. And Arduino is basically a very easy to use microcontroller that can enable connecting the physical world with code. So we can create logic and make motors run, get information from sensors, like basically do whatever we want. And I think the strongest thing in it is its community. It's an open source idea, and many projects are published as open source with instructions. And that's actually what brought me into making art, because that was the thing that opened the world of electronics for me. Like today I still use it, I use many other things, but it's, okay, I think it's a gate for this world. There was another question about it?
How you get the pitching experience, like?
The pitching?
Yeah.
So for me, I
kind of the exchange of giving and as pitching to audience that is not normally used to.
I don't find it different, Eventually, maybe because they were also expecting to hear an artist along with the startups. I didn't feel that it's any different from anything else or from any other audience that I show my works to. There specifically, I showed mostly the work that I was working on there.
So the last question that I have for you is that actually when I visited you in your studio in Tel Aviv, and normally when artists have big studio, normally they share it with other artists. And after you came back from this accelerator, when I asked you, who are those guys, it was actually a startup company. So I was interested if this experience in Axel Springer kind of opened even your way of looking at that, to actually share your studio with startup company.
So I'll disappoint you by saying that it was a very random thing, but maybe it wasn't random because maybe it's a current of things that just happen, and they are connected. Because many, it's not by chance that the entrepreneurship is, as we said, similar between these two worlds, and these two worlds gain from each other. And just when I was accepted to Axel Springer and I was going away for a few months, I was looking for somebody to fill me in, in the studio. And then a friend who has a startup just needed a space, and it clicked immediately. So after I came back from Berlin, they stayed with me. So they're still with me today for over a year and a half. And it's a lot of fun, actually, because they're, I think that they should complain that I make noise and stuff and dust, I don't know. But I think they like it too, and I have a lot of fun having them there.
So maybe that will be my next recommendation to entrepreneur. Instead of taking co-working space, go to rent with an artist studio. Great, Liat. I want to say thank you very much for sharing all that information.
Thank you for having me here.
And
thank you.
And now I think you have a chance to actually ask Liat about all her experience, or ask me about some. I see hands over there.
Thank you. I refer to the project in which text was converted into a picture. My question is, is it reversible? Can you take a picture and turn it into a text, or can you decipher the picture back into a text? Are we here seeing a new way of encoding messages, or creating, maybe in cooperation with Eran, some kind of taking a random picture, image, and extracting from it some poetry?
So it really depends actually on the kind of encoding I choose. I can make it decodable or not. So the linear ones are definitely decodable, but, so definitely maybe is a strong word here, because in many of my works, I also add the physical randomness. And in this work, the randomness is manifested in the paintbrush, in the ink, in the angle of the paper. If there's a lot of ink, it can get wavy and will change the motion of the brush. So if we measure the length, theoretically, we can decode it. But one of the other mapping systems that I created, for example, was not a linear one, and it worked as follows. The machine moved either on the x-axis or on the y-axis, and it alternated each time, x, y, x, y. And the letters were mapped into the length of the paper, both for the x and the y. So it created these kind of like rectangular lines, and there, instead of giving us a linear picture of the text, it gave us a more complete visual of the entire text, or statistics of the text, because sequences of letters that repeated more in the text or in the language became more bolded in the lines. So it has information, but not the information that I think you're looking for.
Hi, I really love your work.
Thank you.
And my question is, how is your art design process? Do you think first in the machine you are creating, or the final visual art?
So I think it's a complicated question, because usually I have a strong intuition of the end process, but there is a lot of things that happen in the process, and I think that's why, for example, I don't give the work to another engineer to do it, but I do all the work myself, because the process eventually changes the work. I think also there is something that's different from other disciplines of art, is that I have to have a lot of patience, because sometimes when I start a work, I will see the result only 2-3 months later. The work that I just showed in France with the glasses, for example, I was working about 3 months on this project, and I could only see it at the location itself. I never had the entire installation built at a studio, which is also a scary thing, because, you know, seeing it for the first time at the location is very scary. But yes, I do have an image of what I expect to see. And sometimes I also have surprises as well. And these surprises can be sometimes in the sound that the emotion makes. Or, for example, in this case, I was working in this tower in La Rochelle that was freezing. It was really cold there. It was this week when it was snowing, and it was snowing on the port. The ships were full of snow. It was really cold. So me and my assistants were working with hot water. So we took hot water, and we filled the glasses with hot water, and then we turned them upside down. And then what happened was the unexpected, that there were, of course, humidity from the hot water, steam, basically. So the steams created the little drops of water at the top of the glasses, but also they created sound, because it created vacuum that got released slowly along a few days. So this was totally unexpected, and I loved seeing that. For me, that's part of the work as well.
More questions?
First, Nir, thank you for inviting me, visiting Madrid. I'm a technologist. I mean, I've been working in technology for the last 43 years, 28 years in Rafael. For those of you, you can really appreciate that we understand what technology is. So, Liat, I would like to compliment you for daring taking technology or information, sensors, and all of that into a world which very few people dare. Because when we talk about technology and information, the first thing that we think about are startups, how to make useful things, and how to make money. And what you are doing is actually very courageous, because you are facing all of us, which are very conservative, and now you have a great challenge in convincing a lot of people that for us art means something very, very traditional, and the fact that there are so many tools available to you artists today allow you to create very, very exciting things like you showed today.
Thank you.
The other comment is to you, Nir. There's a lot of, it's unintuitive to combine artists with innovation or artists with business. And the fact is that artists were the first entrepreneurs, and there's a lot to be learned in the business world from artists. So, good luck.
Last question before we go to the cerveza. I see over there.
I see a parallel between what you do and the technology behind 3D printers. I'd be very curious to see what you can do with that technology. I think it'd be very interesting.
So there is a lot of resemblance, especially in the works, of course, that use the XYZ mechanism. And of course, it's not by chance, because it's a mechanism that is used a lot in the industry. I think that the main difference between using a high-end 3D printer and my things is the control of the uncontrolled, where I choose to add things that are not expected in a way. But theoretically, I could have done that in software, and then fabricating works that also would surprise me and challenge the machines as well. So definitely.
Great. And with that, first of all, I want to say thank you for taking the time in this rain and traffic jams and coming over here to listen what I have to say and what the artists over here have to share with us. I want to say special thank you to the embassy, the Israeli embassy, for helping us making it happen, and for the ambassador for giving us the honor to be here. And with that, thank you all, and let's have some cerveza. No? Gracias.